lot of viewers would like to know, with a store making $1 million per month with Google Ads, where's the money actually coming from? What campaign types will bring in the most money across the strategy, and really how it's chopped up. And with us managing about $1.2, $1.3 million a month on Google Ads for our e-com clients, we see every day how it's split up, especially for the clients that are doing those numbers. So we're going to go over exactly how it's done, the process to get to the point of $1 million per month, because it changes from doing, let's say, low six figures per month, to doing mid to high, to eventually the 1 million a month mark. And then also what that scaling process is like. It's a little bit different than other platforms like Facebook, but if you execute it properly, you have a great store with great products, you will get there. It's just a matter of getting through the testing, executing the right strategy properly, and then scaling to that level. So when it comes to a store actually getting to the point of driving over $1 million a month in revenue, especially profitably, they're usually going to have a pretty developed strategy. And that strategy is going to be across a couple different campaign types. The first is going to be search. After search, we're going to have PMAX. After PMAX, we're going to have shopping. And then the last is going to be YouTube. Now, the way that you build these out, and also the way that you're going to scale each of these, is a bit different because the campaign types operate differently based off of their unique strategy. And when I say unique strategy, it's really going to come down to how you launch them, how you build them out, and then the bidding models that you use on the front end versus the back end, because some of them are going to be more algorithm based. The others are going to be a little bit more traditional, where you have to feed them data individually to be able to switch to that algorithm based bidding model. So really when it comes to these different campaign types, it might differ a little bit per client, but I'm going to use an example of an average client doing $1 million per month in revenue. And let's say search. So search is generally going to be about 25% of the revenue that's coming into the account. The nice thing about search is it's very, very controllable, because you can, very easily fixate on the type of traffic you're going after, but then you can slow down if you're not seeing profitability, or maintain scale at that point and let it do its thing. Because the best part about search is it's very consistent. Once you crack a search campaign and scale into a keyword vertical, really nothing bad's going to happen. It's going to be able to do what it's been doing, unless there's some other crazy market issue that came up or some kind of black swan event, which does not happen rarely often, but it's very, very consistent. Now, the next is going to be PMAX. PMAX is generally going to pull about 40% of the revenue into the account. One of the nice things about PMAX is it's algorithm based. So a lot of the scale will be done behind the scenes without having you to do a lot of heavy lifting. On the search side, you will have to do a lot more of the work on the back end to be able to build out, segment, do all the testing and things of that nature. But PMAX, you're putting a lot of work on the front end to get the campaigns built out properly. We're going to talk about PMAX variations, but the very first PMAX in most cases is going to yield you a certain level of scale. It's going to be a category-based PMAX, which will have assets based off the categories that you're running within your store. But that's generally going to pull you to a pretty good size of scale, especially if you build it up properly. Next is going to be shopping. So shopping is going to be about 20% of the scale. The one tricky thing about shopping is you don't have a ton of control with shopping. It's really going to be a campaign type that's pulling from the feed of your store, generally from an app like Simprosis, which we always recommend, and then it's going to do its thing. There's not a lot of controllability aside from making sure that the feed within your merchant center is very clean. It's pulling in the right variables and making sure that it's coming to the actual Google Ads account properly. Past that, what's going to happen is you'll scale it up through certain steps, which we'll talk about in the video. And then once it hits a plateau, it's generally going to plateau at that level until the market either opens up more, competition drops out, whatever it is. But you don't have a ton of control to force it to scale. It's really going to do its thing, scale, and then it'll plateau at some point. So you don't really have infinite scale there, but it will pull in a pretty decent amount of scale as long as you do what we talked about in this video. And then the last is going to be YouTube. Now, YouTube will be about 15% for what I'm going to talk about. YouTube itself, even though it's owned by Google.com, it is a whole other beast. If you crack YouTube, that's really going to be what gets you to the point of doing multiple millions per month from Google Ads. The thing about it though is YouTube, between Facebook and Google, it's probably the toughest platform for upfront success, because you have to do a substantial amount of testing that requires a really healthy amount of budget. And then of course, the time and knowledge to get that testing done. So it's not easy, but if you can crack it, it's going to open up markets to scale that you're not going to be able to touch without Google in the Facebook side of things. So we'll talk about that, but really for the actual bulk scale of YouTube, we would consider that a whole separate platform. But what I'm talking about here is going to be some tactics that you can use, which are really going after the highest leverage actions. That way you can scoop up some sales from YouTube without doing all those other crazy things that I just mentioned. So let's get into search. Now, search itself, there's going to be different phases of this. The first thing we're going to do really with search is talk about the basic split. And really what I'm talking about here is going to be what we call LHF, low-hanging fruit targeting, which is not going to be warm targeting, but it's going to be people who are searching terms, super high intent, pretty much the highest intent you can find of longer tail keywords, phrase match targeting. That's going to be targeting people who know about your product, not yours specifically, but the product on the market. They have the need, they have the desire, they want to buy, they're just looking for a store to purchase it from. And then the other is going to be warm targeting. Now, let's talk about low-hanging fruit really quick. Low-hanging fruit is going to be the easiest terms to convert, but it's going to be the smallest market, because anytime you get tighter and tighter on what people are searching, generally the longer tail of the keyword, it's going to usually mean that's being searched less because it's more specific. So it's going to be the easiest traffic to convert, but it will not be massive scale unless you get lucky with your market. You do want to capitalize on this first though, because it's going to be the most predictable revenue. You might be able to squeeze out 80, 90, 100K worth of revenue from this a month, depending on your market size, or it might be 20 to 50K per month in revenue. It really depends on your specific product market. But point being is there's not gonna be infinite scale here. At some point, you're gonna cap out, you're gonna move to the next stage. But the key is if you cannot convert low-hanging fruit type traffic, you're not gonna be able to convert the next level, because it kind of goes in a sequence, right? If you can't convert low-hanging fruit, you're not gonna be able to convert broader traffic because they're harder to convert, right? So it's a great test for the I guess not necessarily the functionality, but the viability of your products in the market. And then it'll give you the base of actual revenue coming in from that, which will fund your next test. Next is going to be warm targeting. Now, the need to target warm traffic is a little bit unique to your own circumstance. If there is not, for whatever reason, a lot of competitiveness in your market, or people searching terms that might show up for your type of product, you could probably get away without targeting it. But in most cases, it's not the case, because e-com is so competitive and there's so many stores targeting very similar terms to yours, probably even your own actual terms. You want to make sure that you're there to scoop up that traffic. The money you would lose in purchase value versus what you're going to spend to actually capture the traffic generally outweighs. So most of the time, like I said, it's going to be worthwhile to target your own warm traffic and protect your brand. But if you're in the rare case where there's not people actively showing up for your product or your store, whatever it is, like I said, you probably get away from it. But the nice thing about Google is they reward you based off of relevancy. And there's nothing more relevant than being the actual store someone's searching for. So you're going to get really cheap traffic and really cheap clicks. So highly recommend protecting your own traffic, because it will in end make you more money than it's going to cost to actually capture it. So we talked about converting the easiest traffic to convert. Let's get into what you're going to do next, which is really going to help you scale into the search side of things. So that's going to be really scaling through levels of intent. Now, when it comes to scaling through levels of intent, the most important thing is to do it in order, right? And the order is pretty simple to understand. You're always going to base it off of people who are most likely to convert versus not likely to convert. And let's say you're using, calcium pills as an example. Somebody searching just for bone health, they know they have a problem, but they don't know calcium pills might be the answer. They don't know exactly the solution to their problem, versus somebody searching for best calcium pill in the market. You can kind of understand the levels of intent there, but there's going to be stages in between there. There might be people searching for, will calcium pills help with bone density? They're starting to understand the need, problem, and solution, but that's going to be somewhere in the middle, right? So you're really going to look at the most specific terms you can get, the most broad terms you can get, and then try to get stages in between. That way you can go through those stages, and it's going to protect your budget and also make you the most money through each stage. So when it comes to the levels of intent, you're basically going to maximize each level of the traffic you can get, test through it. There's going to be terms that convert. There's going to be terms that don't. Turn them off, keep them on, allow those campaigns to do what they're doing. And then once you get the campaign to be, I would say, profitable or at least sustainable at some level of scale, right? Because there's going to be a point where you scale, and then the campaign won't spend anymore because there's only a certain amount of terms being searched each month. That's when you're going to move into the next stage and the next stage. So the key here is to continue maximizing each stage. And then once you maximize that stage, then you move to the next one. And that way you don't do it upside down and burn a bunch of budget by trying to go after the more exciting stuff first and not be able to actually convert it. It's really important to know that the more specific the term, the more likely that traffic is to convert just based off of the higher intent aspect of that term. Whereas the more broad the term is, the better assets you're going to need to actually convince that person to buy. So this last part's important to know, because the more high intent the term is, the more likely it's to convert based off that intent. But the more broader the term is, the better assets you're going to need. So if you get to the point where you get to a stage of broadness where you can't actually convert the traffic, then it's time to start working on your actual assets and figure out what do you need to put in front of these people to get them to actually purchase. The last part of this topic is going to be talking about the bidding styles that you're going to be using for each campaign type. Now, search across the board, it's generally pretty cut and dry. The way we almost start every campaign is going to be starting with maximize conversion value. That's telling the campaign to basically scale in the traffic with keeping in conversion value in mind. And that's going to allow the most scale compared to something like TROAS, where TROAS is basically telling Google that you want to scale into traffic as long as it hits a minimum ROAS. Maybe that's 200%, maybe it's 300%, but it's going to limit the scale, right? So what we do is we're going to launch these campaigns starting with maximize conversion value. And then once we maximize the scale for that keyword vertical, then we're going to start to optimize down with the actual TROAS, which will get costs down, but it will limit scale, right? So you use it as a late game optimization step, not at the beginning of the campaign launch, because it's going to really kind of make the campaign operate funky, and try not to scale into traffic just because the data might not feel it's there. But we've tested a million times, and scaling on the front end with maximized conversion value, then doing TROAS works a million times better when it comes to actually scale than optimizing. And that's what you can do across the board. You can always start with TROAS if you really, really, really want to prioritize profitability, but almost every store that we've worked with always wants to maximize market share first and then get profitability second. So it's just something to keep in mind. Next is going to be the PMAX. So when it comes to PMAX, there's going to be what we call a categorical PMAX, and that's almost always what we start with when scaling out an account. And what a categorical PMAX is, it's going to be basically a performance max campaign that has asset groups based off of the categories of the products in your store. Now, this might not apply to you as much if you have very low SKUs, like if you have a couple products, whatever it is, but most stores are going to have a certain level of SKUs, or at least categories, if they're already doing the point of doing multi 6 figures to 7 figures per month. So when it comes to the PMAX, you're going to make sure to basically max out with the best assets, each asset group based off the categories. You're going to want to have obviously contextual headlines, contextual descriptions, pictures, assets, whatever they are. And then you're going to want to also have signals in each asset group that correlate to that category of product, because generally the categories will have uniqueness to it, and giving it unique signals within those asset groups is going to help give the campaign a little guidance. Now, there's a bunch of other settings you can talk about. A lot of the times people ideally will try to exclude branded targeting, but PMAX really doesn't do the job with that, right? Like, we've done it a billion times. But building it out in this way is going to allow you to get the front level of scale. Now, when I say front level of scale, that might be anywhere from $500 a day on the PMAX to $1,500 a day, whatever it is. But at some point, PMAX is going to plateau as well. That's something really common with the Google Ads world. Most campaign types, with how they function, they're going to have some level of scale and some level of plateau until you work through that plateau and get to the next point and the next point. And with PMAX, especially similar to shopping, the plateau will be pretty hard. There's going to be some point in scale where ROI drops off and you have to pull back on scale. And that's really what you're looking for, to let it do its thing, gather more data, let ROI come up, and then get to the next level of scale. Now, there will be a point where you can't just keep waiting and hope ROI is going to come up. And that's where you're going to get into the next point, which is going to be testing different versions of the PMAX. So the first is going to be splitting the categories for independent PMAXs. Now, what I mean by that is, instead of having a PMAX with all the categories in each asset groups, what you're going to do is you're going to take multiple PMAXs and have one asset group with the product categories of that asset group in that PMAX and make it independent. Because the way these campaigns work, the budget's controlled at the campaign level. And when the budget's controlled at the campaign level, Google doesn't always do the best job of dictating where that budget should go. So sometimes you might inhibit scale because Google's making that decision for you. But if you split up the actual PMAXs by categories, then you can force the budget onto what category should in theory be making you the most money, which is generally going to be what's doing the best on other platforms as well, or the best sellers for your store, whatever it is. But being able to force budget on something is very important, because it's kind of like the next level of scale. If Google isn't allowing you to get through the scale leveraging them, then you want to take a little bit more control back and then force it into the areas that should scale further. So next is going to be feed versus no feed. Now, what this is essentially taking the product feed out of the actual PMAX. Now, a lot of the times we tend to not do this because we're going to scale shopping next to the PMAX. But the point of this is really, if the shopping placements are not yielding revenue for your store, you don't want the PMAX to keep pushing budget into it. And just like I said on the other topic, it's going to try to spread it out regardless. So if shopping is not yielding you returns, what you can do is actually take the product feed out of the PMAX, and then it's just going to leverage the other placements, which is going to be really search, YouTube, display, and such. But this is really only something you use situationally if you're not having a lot of luck on the shopping placements. Last is going to be top products. Now, top products is Generally a really good one, because what's going to happen is you're taking the best products that are selling the most from the store and bringing them and giving them their own dedicated PMAX. And then you're going to take the rest, which we can call kind of a catch-all without top products, and put them there. So what's going to happen is, just like the concept of forcing budget onto categories, sometimes you don't have, let's say, best sellers across an entire category. Maybe you have 3 products of a category that does the best. That's where you're going to use something like top products, where you're going to take those products that generate 80% of the store revenue for you, put them in their own dedicated PMAX, and just keep putting gas under the fire. What that's going to do, same idea, it's going to force budget onto these products. It's just going to absolutely take the market share for those specific products and make sure that it pushes those the hardest. So the last part of PMAX is the scaling patterns. I want to talk a little bit about how we scale these out. Now, generally, the larger the scale, the smaller jumps you have to do, because what's going to happen is scale, when it comes to increasing budget, is going to be a direct lever against ROI with PMAX. So what's going to happen is, if you're at, let's say, $1,000 a day in spend, and you're doing a 2.7 ROI on that, and you increase it to $1,200 per day, it's probably going to take the ROI down to, let's say, 2.5. But if you did a bigger increase, it might pull it down even more to where you're not profitable, right? So you want to be very cognitive of how much you can increase based off of how profitable you are. On the front end, you're almost always going to have really spiked up ROI, because PMAXs feed off of warm traffic first, which we consider a bit of a necessary evil, because it's feeding ideal traffic to the PMAX, which is going to give it the best data points, and then it'll allow it to scale further on the back end. So, unfortunately, as much as you want to segment it out completely, and there are settings to try to do this, but they don't do what they say they do, it's still going to allow warm traffic in. It will, on the back end, allow you to scale further, especially if you build it out in the right way. But point being, when it comes to scale, on the front end, you're going to be able to do bigger jumps. A lot of the times on the front end, we're going to be doing anywhere between 30 to 100% in jumps, depending on how high the ROI is. Let's say your break-even ROI is 2.5x, but it's doing a 9x. That's somewhere where you could do a 100% jump, right? If it's 5x and your break-even is 2.5, maybe you do something closer to 50, 60% jump. So you're always kind of teetering it based off the ROI in the moment, the data that's coming in. Be very careful taking Google suggestions, because Google will give you these outlandish suggestions to scale. And Google's suggestions are almost always based off of you spending more money. So you can't take them at face value. Base your increases on the actual data that you're interpreting coming into the campaign type. Now, once you get to the point of doing bigger numbers and you're doing multiple $1,000s per day in spend on the PMAXs, that's where you're going to have to do smaller increases, right? Unless it's going to be a holiday time or like Black Friday, that's where you get really aggressive. But outside of those peak events, you're generally going to be doing anything from 10 to 30% increases compared to, let's say, 30 to 100%. So just be very mindful. Anytime you increase budget on a PMAX, it's going to pull ROI down. And if you're very sensitive about profitability and not losing profit, you want to make sure to do it over time instead of just doing like massive jumps and hoping for the best. We also tend to let PMAXs rest a couple days between increases. So unless it's Black Friday again, we're usually going to allow 2 to 3 days minimum to see how the campaign does, get the full picture of data, and then do the next increases. On average, it's about 3 days. The third campaign type is going to be shopping. Now, this will be a quicker topic because shopping is so fixed in how it operates. You really just, like I said, making sure you have a really clean feed, everything's operating well, then you're going to set up the campaign. But there's different ways of setting up the campaign. How we tend to like to do it is having a split. So we're going to have the top products in one shopping campaign and then the rest in the other. That way, the budget can always focus on what's going to work the best. Now, PMAX does a better job of sorting it out for you on the back end. Shopping does not. Shopping operates on a little bit older of a, I would say maybe like 5 to 10 year methodology of how it works, right? It's not basing its moves off the algorithm. It's basing it off of the campaigns data that's being fed into. And that's also going to come down to how we do different bidding methodologies too, which I'll talk about next. But you can't rely on the algorithm as much on these shopping campaigns. You have to slowly feed it its own data. And that way it's going to start getting that ball rolling instead of it basing off of the algorithm's data, kind of like the PMAX does. But you can definitely do a catch-all and do all products. But because it's not going to cater the budget as smartly, we generally like to be a little bit more controlled, force the budget on the top products, and then have the rest of the products do their thing. But when it comes to operating these campaigns, like I said, the bidding methodology is going to be a little different. Instead of starting it out with a algorithm bidding model, like, we talked about maximize conversion value, you're going to start with manual CPC. Reason being is because if you start with something like maximize conversion value, it's not going to allow the campaign to operate how it's meant to operate. So you basically have to feed it traffic in a controlled way with controlled costs, manual CPC, until it gets enough conversions to feed data based off of who's likely to convert. Now, a lot of the times the number of conversions can change. Generally, we're looking for an average like 25, 30 minimum. But if you're at scale and you're feeding a lot of data into it and you're getting to the point of 30 to 50 conversions, at that point, you're going to want to flip it. And then you can start leveraging the algorithm, the actual campaign, and not rely on Google just kind of make the magic work for you. So just make sure when you're doing shopping, even though the setup's easy, the way it operates is a bit of a different beast. It just does not operate in the same way PMax does, which we would love if it did. It just doesn't work that way. So last is going to be YouTube. Now, when we're talking about YouTube, once again, this isn't about all the scale exponential potential that YouTube has, because at the end of the day, it is a totally different platform with how it operates, the assets you need, how you're going to scale it. But there are definitely things you can do that are higher leverage that'll be easier for you to scoop up obvious traffic to convert. And this is, like I said, it could scoop up and be 10 to 15% of the revenue coming to your account if you've gotten to that point. Now, with YouTube, there's a couple different things that we do first to maximize the percentage of success when it comes to targeting. The first is going to be warm remarketing. Now, with remarketing, simple concept, you're basically protecting your traffic, right? The nice thing about remarketing with YouTube is the CPM is going to be very low. So you're going to have very cheap traffic and you're going to be able to stay in front of them. This is going to be traffic that you're paying for from PPC, from Google, from Facebook, TikTok, wherever else you're getting traffic from. But the key here is making sure that you also do not give Google the ability to expand on your audience. There's a setting that they have when setting up these campaigns called optimized targeting. And it sounds cool, right? You know, you're optimizing the targeting, it's going to make you more money, sure. But no, what really happens is it gives Google the ability to go after cold targeting based off of what it feels your warm targeting is like. And it just absolutely shreds through your money. So you want to make sure to not have that setting on, because if you have that setting on, you will burn a ton of money and it's going to suck. But with remarketing, very simple, right? You're going to use the assets you probably already have, especially what's working best on the Facebook side, different videos that you know have proof of concept, and then set those up and just keep putting them in front of the audiences that you know should convert. And it's going to scoop up traffic. You can scale this at will. Really, it's going to be a finite, audience. It's not going to be a super scalable audience. So I would probably focus on profitability here, just so you can scoop up the people come back to your site and make purchases. If you're trying to avoid these people going to other sites and purchasing, you can go closer to break even and at least kind of scoop that market share back. But a lot of the times with remarketing, we're going to use that as a means for profitability. Next is going to be custom keyword audiences. Now, this is a really cool one because custom keyword audiences is basically targeting people who are searching terms that you know convert. So if you have all these different keywords that you're targeting on the PPC side, that you're seeing in the PMax keyword groupings, that kind of thing, you can create custom keyword audiences with those and then target them on the YouTube side. So you know the search intent's there, but you can also attack them with video, which is really cool. So it's a great way to get a fixed audience that you know converts, but also show them a different type of creative, medium, and scoop them back to your site and then get them to purchase, right? So that's going to be another way to target some really low-hanging fruit traffic. And then the next is going to be custom website audiences. Now, this one's really unique too because it actually gives you a way to hijack traffic. You can actually put in the custom audiences websites for your competitors. And it's going to target the people that go to your competitor's website as an audience, which is really cool. So this is something that you want to do carefully because whenever you target another website's audience, you are making the assumption you'll be able to convert it, right? And I'm not saying you can't, you probably will be able to, but to steal brand trust from another website, you have to have a really great product and really great assets. If you're at the point where you're getting close to or past 7 figures per month in your store's revenue, you probably do, right? It's just a heads up. It's not as simple as converting, let's say, remarketing traffic, but it is a great way to pull qualified traffic from your competitors' websites, pull them to your site and get them to convert. So definitely worthwhile testing. Now, YouTube as well, similar to search, you're going to always start with something that's a little bit more open-ended with the bidding model. So in this case, it's going to be maximize conversion value. YouTube itself isn't going to come on the back end and save you basically with the algorithm. If it does not work on the front end, it's probably not going to work. So it's something where you're going to want to be really mindful. If your test is not working well, cut it off, test something new. It's not going to all of a sudden steamroll and get the data and then all of a sudden pick up results. If it doesn't work on the front end, 99% of the time it's not going to work on the back end. So just make sure to cut off tests quickly if they do not work. You will need unique assets if you're going to try to really dive into YouTube. A lot of the times you can't get away with just using the video from Facebook. People on YouTube, they're sitting there watching videos. They're really there to be either entertained or to be educated on something. So you really want to play into that. And a lot of the times you can get away with showing longer form ads as well, really showcasing your products, the benefits of them, advertorial style, that kind of thing. And you will want also assets on the back end that are a bit different too. Most of the time you're not gonna be able to just convert YouTube traffic by sending them to the product page. I would test it first, but a lot of times it's not how it works out. You're gonna wanna make sure that you have unique assets that really kind of carry that process of educating, entertaining, and then it gets them to the product page to buy. So just be careful when you go to YouTube. Like I said, very easy to burn money. If the tests don't work on the front end, cut them off quick, and then make sure to go into it with the best possible assets for YouTube. It's going to give you the highest chance of success. Now that leads to the last part, which is future opportunity on YouTube. If you've gotten to the point where you've done everything I've talked about in this video and you've really maximized scale in those areas, that really leaves YouTube next, right? We'll talk about in a different video what you can do to start heavily testing into YouTube. But forewarning, it is a long journey on the front end. But once you crack it, it's going to open up a whole nother channel for you to scale into, which is really, really amazing. When we do that for our clients, you're going to reach new levels, right? So that's really going to be the vehicle that's going to take you from, let's say, 1 million a month in Google YouTube to doing $2 to $3+ million per month in revenue from YouTube and Google. So make sure once you get to that point, do everything first. But once you pass that and you have the time, money, energy, and expertise to test into YouTube, it's definitely going to be time to do that. So if you've enjoyed this video and you have any questions at all, please make sure to put them in the comment section. I'll actually answer them personally. Always happy to talk to you guys. Like and subscribe. We're going to be putting out more content like this. It kind of goes over longer information of what's really working day to day for our clients and our agency. Like I say, we make our clients about $5 million a month in e-com. So we're testing things constantly. We're going to be putting out content a few times a week going over that. So thanks again for watching. Appreciate the like and subscribe.